Claire Whitman did not know that on the very night she was called temporary family, the wedding ring on her hand had become nothing more than a meaningless ornament. The whole room laughed softly, but to her, that laughter sounded like a door locking behind her. Claire was 31 years old. She had once been a woman with a life of her own in Portland. She had a small apartment on the top floor of an old building with a balcony overlooking a street lined with maple trees. She had a job in interior design that made her wake up every morning feeling like she was moving in the right direction. She was not rich, but she paid her own rent. She did not stand out at elegant parties, but she knew who she was. Later, that would become the first thing the Caldwell family wanted to take from her. Ethan Caldwell entered her life like a safe choice. He was 34, a financial manager, slow-spoken, neatly dressed, always able to make people believe he was the kind of man who would never hurt anyone. When he proposed, Claire thought love did not need to burn brightly. Maybe peace was enough. She was wrong. Some fires do not burn loudly. They smolder behind beautiful walls until one day they turn the whole house into ash. After the wedding, her mother-in-law, Vivian Caldwell, suggested that the couple move into the large house in Lake Oswego. Vivian said it was only a temporary solution. "Just 1 year," she said. "The two of you will save more money, and then buying your own house will not be too late." Ethan nodded before Claire even had time to think. He held her hand under the dining table and squeezed it gently, as if he were reassuring her. Claire looked at her husband's calm face, then at her mother-in-law's soft smile, and told herself she should not make things difficult. From the outside, the Caldwell house looked warm and inviting. A white fence, carefully trimmed rose bushes, shining glass doors, and a living room that always smelled of pine wood and expensive scented candles. But inside, everything had an owner. The kitchen belonged to Vivian. The dining room belonged to Vivian. The household schedule belonged to Vivian. Even the way Claire placed a napkin on the table could become proof that she was not refined enough to belong to this family. Vivian never raised her voice. She was more dangerous than that. She only looked, a slow, cold, precise look, like a needle passing through thin fabric. When Claire folded the napkins the wrong way, Vivian unfolded them and folded them again right in front of her. When Claire cooked a dish Ethan had once praised, Vivian set down her fork and said the Caldwell family usually ate lighter meals in the evening. When Claire wore the dress she loved, Marissa, Ethan's sister, smiled and said that style was very cute for coffee with old friends. Old friends. Those two words grew smaller and smaller in Claire's life. At first, she still went to work, but then Vivian's back began to hurt. Ethan became busier. The house had guests more often. Vivian said the family needed a woman who knew how to keep a home together. Ethan said his salary was enough for both of them. He said it very gently, very reasonably, as if Claire leaving her job was only a calculation, not a piece of her soul being cut away. The day Claire sent her resignation email, she sat in her car for a long time. Rain fell against the windshield, blurring the familiar buildings in front of her. She cried, but she did not call anyone, because she did not know how to explain that she was handing over her own life with her own hands, while everyone around her kept saying it was good for her marriage. From that day on, the Caldwell house swallowed her more slowly and more deeply. In the morning, she woke before everyone else to make coffee. At noon, she went grocery shopping from the list Vivian had written. At night, she set the table, washed the dishes, listened to Marissa talk about shopping trips, listened to Ethan talk about work, listened to Vivian repeat the Caldwell family history as if it were a noble bloodline that Claire was only allowed to stand outside and look at. Once, during a small dinner with the neighbors, Vivian placed a hand on Claire's shoulder and said in a voice as sweet as honey that Claire was still learning how to become a Caldwell. Everyone laughed. Ethan laughed too. Claire laughed along, because she had become very good at that. But inside her mind, something quietly cracked. She began to realize that no one asked what she wanted anymore. No one asked if she missed her job. No one asked if she was lonely. No one asked why she called her friends less often than before. Ethan saw all of it, but he always looked away at exactly the right moment. His silence was not as sharp as Vivian's, but it was heavier. It pressed down on Claire every day, making her doubt her own feelings. Claire did not understand that this was only the beginning of a family drama story in which the entire Caldwell family had already written her role for her. In that story, she was not a daughter-in-law. She was not a wife. She was only the woman brought into the house to fill an empty space, serve an image, and disappear when they no longer needed her. What they did not know was that Robert Caldwell, Ethan's late father, had seen everything. He had left behind a secret in the locked room on the second floor. And one day soon, the most underestimated woman in that house would be the one holding the key that opened the whole truth. The locked room on the second floor did not just hold the old belongings of a dead man. It held the real reason Vivian Caldwell had always been afraid of Claire touching anything connected to the past. That afternoon, Lake Oswego was covered in a thin rain. The entire Caldwell house was so quiet that the ticking clock in the hallway sounded like a knock coming from somewhere very far away. Vivian had gone to a charity event. Ethan said he had a late meeting. Marissa had gone to the spa with a friend. Claire was left alone, as always, with a list of chores placed neatly on the kitchen counter. The final line on the paper made her stop. Clean Robert's old study. Do not touch the left drawer. Vivian had written it very briefly, but the briefer it was, the more it sounded like a warning. Claire stood there, staring at the paper for a long time. Inside her chest, an old feeling rose again, small but unmistakable. It was not curiosity. It was the instinct of someone who had been looked down on for too long, finally realizing that something was being hidden from her. Robert Caldwell had once been the only person in that house who spoke to Claire like she was a grown woman. When he was alive, he did not defend her loudly, but he saw her. He saw the way Vivian cut her off during meals. He saw the way Ethan left her standing alone in family conversations. Once, when Claire brought tea into his study, Robert had looked at her through his thin glasses and told her not to let this house teach her to forget her own voice. Back then, Claire had only smiled sadly. Now, those words returned to her, cold and sharp. She stepped into Robert's study. The air in the room smelled of old paper, leather, and wood dust. On the desk, the green lamp he used to turn on at night was still there. Books on property law, land maps, and family records were lined up like a silent army waiting for orders. Claire dusted each shelf, rearranged each stack of papers, and tried to do exactly what she had been told. But the left drawer was still there, dark and silent, like a mouth pressed shut. At last, she opened it. Inside there were only fountain pens, a few old photographs, and a picture frame lying face down. Claire picked up the frame. Behind the bent backing, a cream-colored envelope had been hidden carefully. Her name was on it, written in Robert's slightly trembling, slanted handwriting. Claire did not breathe for several seconds. She opened the envelope with ice-cold hands. Inside was a copy of a letter addressed to Robert's private attorney, Grant Holloway. The words did not explain everything, but they were enough to make the world around Claire tilt. Robert mentioned a lakefront property that had never been disclosed in the family records. He wrote that if Claire was ever pushed out of the Caldwell house, she needed to be protected. He also wrote one sentence that made her eyes sting. She is the only person in this house who never asked me how much I was leaving behind. She only asked me if I was still in pain. Claire folded the letter. In that moment, she understood that this was not just a hidden inheritance story. This was an inheritance drama that Vivian had locked away with silence, smiles, and false kindness. But the secret inside Robert's room was not the only thing beginning to open. That night, Ethan came home late. There was an unfamiliar scent of perfume on his collar, light but expensive, not like anything Claire had ever bought for him. He said the meeting had run long. Vivian sat in the living room, sipping tea, not lifting her head, but the corner of her mouth curved slightly. She knew. Claire recognized it immediately. Vivian did not just know Ethan was lying. She was pleased with the lie. In the days that followed, the name Natalie Brooks began appearing inside the Caldwell house like a guest who had not yet stepped through the door but already had a seat waiting at the dining table. Ethan said Natalie was a partner in a new project. Vivian said Natalie was sharp, well-bred, and understood how powerful families operated. Marissa laughed and said women like Natalie did not need to learn how to become anyone because they were born belonging in beautiful rooms. Claire sat across from them, her hand resting on her napkin, her fingernails pressing lightly into her palm. She said nothing. Not because it did not hurt, but because, for the first time in years, she began to understand the value of being silent at the right moment. That night, when the entire house was asleep, Claire called Maya Reynolds from her car, parked 2 blocks away from the Caldwell house. Maya had once been her best friend, the one who had kept texting for years even as Claire replied less and less. When she heard Claire's voice trembling, Maya did not ask why she was calling only now. She simply said, "Send me everything you have." The next morning, Claire photographed Robert's letter, the marriage documents, the joint account statements, the tax records, and the papers she had found in the old cabinet. Maya read everything in silence. By afternoon, she called back. Her voice was no longer the voice of a worried friend, it was the voice of a lawyer who had just seen a hidden door swing open. Maya said Robert might have left a portion of the estate to Claire through an amendment to the family trust. If Vivian had hidden that, then this was not just a matter of a toxic mother-in-law. These were hidden family truths. This was property. This was a legal right. This was the reason they needed Claire weak, poor, and silent. Claire sat motionless for a long time after the call. In the rearview mirror, she saw that her face looked thinner than before, her eyes deeper, her lips pale from years of swallowing words. But behind that exhaustion, someone else was looking back at her. Someone who had not disappeared. Someone who had only been waiting for the chance to stand up. From that day on, Claire began to prepare. She opened a private account at a bank Vivian did not know about. She sent out job applications using Maya's address. She kept copies of the documents in a shoebox at her friend's house. She did not confront Ethan when he came home late. She did not ask who Natalie was when he placed his phone face down on the table. She did not react when Vivian called her a woman who still needed to learn more about family history. Because Claire had understood something the Caldwell family had never imagined. They thought she knew nothing. They thought she had no money, nowhere to go, no power. They thought she was only a supporting character in the Reddit family drama story they controlled from beginning to end. But in Claire's hands now were the name Grant Holloway, Robert's letter, and a truth powerful enough to drag the entire Caldwell family into the light. The fundraising party that night was not held to help anyone. It was staged so Vivian Caldwell could show that she still controlled everything, the house, the reputation, her son, and the daughter-in-law she believed had been completely broken. By late afternoon, the Caldwell house was glowing like a stage. The crystal had been polished until it reflected the golden lights on the ceiling. White flowers covered the long dining table. The tablecloth had been ironed flat without a single crease. Vivian moved from room to room in her cream-colored dress, pearls around her neck, smiling at the gardener, the wine delivery man, and the neighbors who arrived early. But every time she looked at Claire, that smile turned into a thin blade. Claire wore a very old pale blue dress, the only dress in her closet that still made her recognize herself. She arranged the flowers, set the glasses, adjusted the candles, and checked the food in the kitchen. Vivian did not thank her. She only said the flowers should be a little lower, the salad plate was too far to the left, and not to let the guests think the Caldwell family had lost its standards. Ethan stood near the living room door in a charcoal suit, his watch shining on his wrist. He looked at Claire a few times, but not with the eyes of a husband. It was the look of someone worried that an object in the house might be placed in the wrong spot, just as the guests arrived. Then Natalie Brooks appeared. She walked in wearing a dark blue dress, her hair softly curled, the scent of her perfume trailing behind her like a statement. Vivian stepped forward and took Natalie's hands in both of hers, so warmly that the people around them might have thought they had known each other for years. Ethan smiled at Natalie. A real smile, not tired, not polite, not the smile he had given Claire for so many years. Claire saw everything. She saw Marissa leaning in to whisper to Natalie. She saw Vivian guiding Natalie through the living room as if she were introducing a future member of the family. She saw Ethan pour wine for Natalie before remembering that his wife was standing only a few steps away. More guests began to arrive. They were neighbors, members of the charity circle, church friends, and a few of Ethan's business partners. They praised Vivian for organizing everything so beautifully. They said the house was stunning. They looked at Claire and asked if she was the event coordinator. Vivian heard them. She did not correct them. She simply placed a hand on Claire's back and said very softly that Claire had been helping them quite a lot around the house. That sentence fell into the room like a broken plate no one dared to look at. Claire felt the blood in her body slow down. Ethan heard it. He turned away. Marissa raised her wineglass to her lips to hide her smile. Then Marissa said, not too loudly, but loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Some people marry into a family, but some people are only temporary family." A few guests laughed awkwardly. Natalie lowered her eyes, but the corner of her mouth curved upward. Vivian did not scold her daughter. Ethan remained silent. In that moment, Claire understood that they did not only want to replace her, they wanted her to believe she was not worthy of staying, but the front door opened at exactly that moment. Maya Reynolds walked in, wearing a simple black suit, her eyes calm as a winter lake. Beside her was Grant Holloway, a silver-haired man with a slightly bent back, holding an old leather briefcase. He did not need to say much. His presence alone was enough to make Vivian freeze. Claire saw Vivian's hand tighten around her wineglass. Grant stepped into the center of the room and politely greeted a few old acquaintances. When his eyes stopped on Vivian, the room seemed to grow colder. He said he did not mean to interrupt the party, but there was a matter Robert Caldwell had asked him to revise before his death, and it seemed it had never been mentioned to the person who needed to know. Vivian immediately smiled. A beautiful, thin, desperate smile. She said tonight was not the time. Grant replied that Robert had waited long enough. No one laughed anymore. Maya opened the document case. Copies were placed on the table. The Family Trust Amendment. The lakefront property. Robert's handwritten notes. Claire's name was there, clear enough that Ethan could no longer pretend not to see it. Grant said Robert had left a separate portion of property to Claire, not because she was Ethan's wife, not because she needed pity, but because in the final months of his life, while Vivian was busy protecting her reputation, Marissa was busy spending money, and Ethan was busy avoiding his father's illness, only Claire sat beside Robert, read to him, reminded him to take his medicine, and asked him if he was in pain. Natalie turned toward Ethan, her face changed color. In her mind, Ethan's promises about the property, the lake house, and their new life began to collapse like walls soaked with water. Ethan stood motionless. He did not look at Natalie. He did not look at his mother. He looked at Claire, for the first time as if he were seeing a real person. Vivian said Claire had manipulated a sick old man. Grant placed another sheet of paper on the table. It was Robert's written note, confirming that he suspected Vivian of hiding documents and misusing the family trust. An old friend of Robert's stepped forward from among the guests, his voice trembling but firm. He said Robert had once told him that Claire was the only person in that house who still had kindness. The room went dead silent. It was not the loud kind of revenge found in some best revenge stories. No one screamed. No glass of wine was thrown. But the truth had done what Claire did not need to do. It stripped away the pearls, the smiles, the money, and the hypocritical words. Claire took off her wedding ring. She placed it on the table beside the inheritance amendment. She said very quietly, "For 3 years, they kept me in this house not because I belonged to the family. They kept me here because they were afraid I would learn that I had the right to leave with more than one suitcase." No one answered, and that silence was the moment Vivian lost. After that night, the Caldwell house still had its lights on, but no one inside that house could pretend anymore that everything was as clean as the crystal tabletop. Vivian had once made Claire wipe again and again. The guests left very quickly. Coats were placed over shoulders in silence. Handshakes became brief. Avoiding eyes moved past Vivian, then Ethan, then lingered on Claire a little longer, as if they had just seen a woman step out of the ashes without anyone pulling her up. The rumors would certainly spread before the night was over. Claire knew that. Vivian knew it too, and that was exactly what made her face harden like ice. Vivian pulled Claire near the staircase. Her voice was still low, still controlled, but beneath that calm surface, a crack was spreading. She said this matter should be handled within the family. She said Robert had not been clear-minded when he was sick. She said Claire did not understand the pressure of a family with a reputation. Claire looked at her for a long time. The woman standing in front of her had once made her tremble with a single glance. She had once made Claire apologize when she had done nothing wrong. She had once made Claire believe she was only a guest being tolerated inside her own marriage. But tonight, Vivian looked much smaller than she had in Claire's memory. Not because Vivian had become weaker, but because Claire had finally stood upright. Ethan stepped forward. He had taken off his tie, his hair was messy, and his eyes were red. For the first time in years, he no longer had his familiar calm expression. The composure that had once made Claire feel safe was gone, revealing a man terrified because the chair beneath him had just been pulled away. He said they could fix this. He said everything was more complicated than she thought. He said he had been meaning to tell her about Natalie, about the property, about Vivian, about all of it. Those words fell to the floor like fake coins. Claire heard them, but she no longer picked them up. She only said, "You had 3 years." Just 3 short words. But they closed a door Ethan had never believed Claire was strong enough to close by herself. Upstairs, in the bedroom where she had once learned how to be silent, Claire pulled the bag she had already prepared from under the closet. There was not much inside. A few sets of clothes, her personal documents, an old notebook, the shawl Robert had given her during his final winter. Everything else could be collected later, or left behind forever. Some lives have to be left lightly, otherwise the past will cling to your wrist like a chain. Maya was waiting outside in the car. Grant had already left, leaving behind his attorney's card and a message that he would contact Claire's legal representative in the morning. No one needed to say much. There are some nights when silence is kinder than every word of comfort. When Claire walked down the stairs, Marissa was standing in the living room, her face pale with anger and fear. She wanted to say something sharp and cruel, as she always did, but she could not find a sentence strong enough. Natalie had disappeared at some point. Maybe she understood that Ethan was not the door to the wealthy life she had imagined. Maybe she was simply another person in the Caldwell family conflict stories, someone who had entered because of ambition and left when the smell of smoke began to rise. Claire walked past Vivian, past Ethan, past the table where her wedding ring still lay beside the inheritance amendment. She did not take the ring back. It belonged to a version of her who had tried to love a man who only knew how to stay silent when she was humiliated. Outside, the cold air touched Claire's face. She stood on the front porch for a moment. Behind her was the large house, the white fence, the rose garden, the shining glass doors, all the things that had once made outsiders think she was lucky. But luck was not living in a beautiful house. Luck was still having enough strength to walk out of a place that was slowly killing your voice. The divorce lasted for months. Vivian tried to fight it, but Robert's documents were too clear. Grant and Maya helped Claire reclaim the legal share of property that belonged to her. Claire did not ask for more. She only took what Robert had left behind and took back the right to live without asking anyone for permission. Ethan lost Natalie faster than Claire had ever imagined. When Natalie understood that the lakefront house was not in his hands, her love faded very neatly. Marissa was investigated for the money improperly withdrawn from the family trust. Vivian stepped down from the charity circle after the hidden family truths spread through the community. A toxic mother-in-law can control a dining table, but she cannot control the truth once it has walked out the door. Claire moved back to Portland, into a small apartment with a window that caught the morning sun. She took a job at an interior design studio. On her first day at work, she wore her old blazer, held a hot cup of coffee, sat at her new desk, and opened her computer. No one called her temporary. No one told her she had to learn how to belong. She was simply there, with her own name, her own work, and her own breath. One evening, Claire opened the box Robert had left behind. Inside was a small piece of paper with his slightly trembling handwriting. "Never let them convince you that kindness is weakness," Claire cried when she read it, not because she was sad, but because she finally understood that she had never been weak. She had only been placed somewhere that treated kindness as something to be used. And that was how the Caldwell hidden inheritance story became one of the quietest karma revenge stories. There were no screams. There was no loud revenge scene. There was only an underestimated woman who stood up at the right moment. held the truth in her hands, and walked out of the house that had once tried to bury her alive. If you were Claire, would you have exposed Vivian and Ethan in front of everyone, or would you have quietly let the lawyers handle everything afterward? Who was truly the most guilty in this family drama story? The cheating husband, the toxic mother-in-law, or the entire family that helped hide the truth? Leave your comment below, hit like if this story made you think, and subscribe to hear more Reddit family drama story videos filled with secrets, betrayal, and endings viewers will never forget.